In August of 1971, in the basement of a psychology building at Stanford University, a group of ordinary young men walked down a flight of stairs into a hallway that had been converted almost overnight into a prison. They were college students. They had answered a newspaper ad offering $15 a day to take part in a study on the psychology of imprisonment. Most of them needed the money. None of them thought, going in, that anything unusual was about to happen to them. Within 6 days, the experiment would be shut down, not because it had run its course, because a 29-year-old psychologist, watching through a hidden camera, would be told by someone he trusted that what was happening in that basement had stopped being a study and had started being something else entirely. This is the story of what happened in between. Before we get there, it's worth sitting with a question, because the whole experiment was built around it. If you took a group of people, completely average, completely healthy, nothing wrong with any of them, and you gave half of them total power over the other half, what would happen? Would decent people stay decent? Or is decency something that only survives under the right conditions and disappears the moment those conditions change? That was the question, and the man who wanted an answer to it was named Philip Zimbardo. Zimbardo was young, ambitious, and deeply interested in a specific kind of horror. Not the horror of monsters, but the horror of ordinary people doing monstrous things. He'd grown up in the South Bronx, in a neighborhood where he had watched friends turn cruel under the pressure of circumstance, and he carried that observation with him into his career. He didn't believe that cruelty required cruel people. He suspected it just required the right situation. So he designed one. He and his team put an ad in the local newspaper. Male college students wanted for a psychological study of prison life. $15 a day for 1 to 2 weeks. 75 men responded. Zimbardo and his colleagues narrowed them down through interviews and psychological testing, screening out anyone with a history of violence, anyone with a criminal record, anyone who showed signs of instability. What was left was 24 young men, middle class, educated, psychologically stable by every test available at the time. Ordinary in the most literal sense of the word. They were split into 2 groups by a coin flip. 12 would be prisoners, 12 would be guards. There was no psychological difference between them at the start. The coin flip was the only thing that separated who would hold power and who would have it held over them. The prisoners didn't get a gentle introduction. In a detail that Zimbardo would later say, he included almost as an afterthought, a way of making the simulation feel real. The prisoners were arrested at their actual homes, without warning, by real Palo Alto police officers who had agreed to help stage the scenario. Officers showed up at these students' front doors, informed neighbors that they were being arrested on charges of armed robbery, handcuffed them, read them their rights, and drove them to the police station in the back of a squad car. At the station, they were fingerprinted, photographed, and processed exactly as any real suspect would be. Then they were blindfolded and driven to the prison, the basement corridor on campus that had been fitted with barred cells, a solitary confinement closet, and a yard for exercise. When they arrived, the guards were waiting. The guards had been given almost no instructions. Zimbardo told them only that they were not allowed to use physical violence, and that otherwise it was up to them to maintain order and run the prison as they saw fit. He wanted their behavior to emerge naturally, without a script. He gave them uniforms, khaki with reflective sunglasses that hid their eyes, and billy clubs, which were meant to be symbolic, a prop rather than a weapon. He gave them whistles, he gave them the keys. He did not give the prisoners names. From the moment they arrived, each one was assigned a number stitched onto a smock they were forced to wear with no underwear beneath it. An intentional detail meant to make them feel exposed and humiliated. Chains were looped around one ankle, a constant physical reminder of their new status. Real names disappeared. From here forward, they would be called only by their numbers, and eventually, some of them stopped answering to anything else. The first day was almost uneventful. Some of the guards felt awkward in the role, unsure how seriously to take it. Some of the prisoners treated the whole thing like a game, laughing about the silliness of the uniforms and their new fake identities. It felt, to almost everyone involved, like exactly what it was supposed to be: a simulation, a performance, something they could step out of at the end of the day. Then came the second day, and the performance stopped feeling like one. The prisoners, chafing under the arbitrary rules and small humiliations, staged a rebellion. They barricaded themselves in their cells using their beds, ripped the numbers off their smocks, and refused to come out or follow orders. It was a small act of resistance, the kind of thing you might expect from any group of young men told to follow pointless rules by their peers. But it triggered something in the guards that none of them had expected in themselves. Without any instruction to do so, the guards called in reinforcements from the off-duty shift, broke into the rebelling cells with fire extinguishers, sprayed the prisoners with the chemical to force them back, stripped them, and took their beds away entirely. From that point forward, the guards stopped treating the situation as a simulation to manage and started treating it as a problem to dominate. They began separating the prisoners into a good cell and a bad cell, placing the ringleaders of the rebellion together and telling the rest that the good cell had informants among them. A lie designed purely to breed mistrust and prevent the prisoners from organizing again. It worked. The prisoners never trusted each other in the same way again. The illusion of solidarity, so easily and cheaply shattered, would not return. And the guards, having discovered how easily they could reassert control, did not stop there. Over the days that followed, without ever crossing the explicit line into physical violence, they escalated in almost every other direction available to them. They woke prisoners in the middle of the night for head counts that served no purpose beyond exhaustion. They forced them to do meaningless repetitive exercise. They denied bathroom privileges, sometimes forcing prisoners to relieve themselves in buckets left in their cells, which were then, in some documented instances, left unemptied as an additional degradation. They used psychological tactics that hadn't been prompted by anyone, assigning prisoners demeaning tasks, forcing them to recite their numbers, making them perform for entertainment. The most disturbing part of this wasn't any single incident, it was the trajectory. Each day, the guards who leaned into the role went further than the day before, and each day, the ones who were uncomfortable with it did less to stop their peers than the day before. Nobody had told the guards to escalate, nobody had rewarded them for it. It simply happened day over day, as though power once handed to ordinary people with almost no oversight followed its own gravity. By the third day, a prisoner known as 8612, one of the men who had helped lead the initial rebellion, began showing signs of real psychological distress. Not performed distress, not a strategy to get released. He cried uncontrollably. He raged. He told the research team he felt like he was losing his mind, that the walls of the situation had closed in around him in a way he could no longer see past. Zimbardo, when told about 8612's breakdown, did something that in hindsight he has spent decades reckoning with publicly. Rather than immediately ending the man's participation, his first instinct was to treat 8612 as a prisoner attempting to manipulate his way out. Because by that point, 3 days in, Zimbardo himself had stopped thinking like a researcher observing a prison and started thinking like the superintendent of one. He offered 8612 a deal instead of a release. Become an informant against the other prisoners and conditions would improve. It was only when 8612's breakdown became undeniable, when the distress clearly wasn't strategic, that he was finally released from the study. He wasn't the last one. Prisoner after prisoner began to break down under the accumulated weight of sleep deprivation, humiliation, and the sheer psychological toll of being treated hour after hour as though they were less than people. 5 of the 12 prisoners would eventually need to be released early due to extreme emotional distress that in some cases lingered well beyond the walls of that basement. Meanwhile, something almost as strange was happening on the other side of the bars. Not every guard became cruel. This detail matters because it complicates any simple story about human nature being universally corruptible. Some guards remained fair throughout, doing small kindnesses when they thought no one was watching, refusing to participate in the worst of the humiliations, but a significant number did not just tolerate cruelty, they enjoyed it. One guard in particular, whom the prisoners nicknamed after a sadistic character from a film, began inventing punishments with a level of creative cruelty that unsettled even his fellow guards. He would later say that he'd been testing how far he could push people before someone told him to stop, and no one ever did. The environment had somehow produced 2 kinds of transformation at once. Prisoners collapsing into a kind of learned helplessness that made them stop resisting even obviously unjust treatment, and a subset of guards discovering a taste for domination they hadn't known they possessed. Neither group had been screened for these traits going in. The coin flip had built the entire divide. Zimbardo, for his part, was undergoing his own transformation, one that, in retrospect, he considers the most important finding of the entire study, more important even than what happened to the guards or prisoners. He had stopped being the principal investigator. He had, in his own later words, become the actual superintendent of an actual prison. He worried about security. He worried about a rumored prison break. He met with real correctional officials to discuss his facility as though it were an authentic institution. The situation had absorbed him just as completely as it had absorbed the young men playing guards and prisoners. The man designing the study to understand how situations could overpower individual character had, without realizing it, been overpowered by the very situation he'd built. It took an outside perspective to break the spell. On the 5th day, a graduate student named Christina Maslach came to observe the study, someone who had no stake in its continuation, no investment in seeing it prove its hypothesis. She walked through the basement and watched the guards marching a line of shackled, hooded prisoners to the bathroom, and she was horrified in a way that no one inside the study had been for days. She confronted Zimbardo that night, telling him, in essence, that what he had built was no longer science. It was suffering, and he was allowing it to continue. Of the more than 50 outside observers who had passed through the study over its 6 days, she was the only one who objected. Zimbardo, by his own account, initially reacted defensively, annoyed that she couldn't see the important psychological process unfolding in front of her. But something in her reaction cut through. The next morning, on day 6 of a planned 2-week study, he ended it. The prisoners who remained were overjoyed. Many of the guards, strangely, were disappointed. Some had grown to enjoy the role, and a few expressed genuine regret that it was ending so soon. In debriefing sessions afterward, prisoners and guards were brought back together out of role to talk through what had happened. Guards apologized, some cried, most were shocked, looking back at what they had been willing to do, and more specifically, at how little it had taken to get them there. Now, it's worth pausing on something the After Dark format doesn't usually spend much time on, but which matters if we're going to sit with this story honestly. In the decades since 1971, the Stanford prison experiment has come under serious and legitimate scrutiny. Some of the guards have said in later interviews that they were, in part, playing a role they believed the researchers wanted to see, performing cruelty rather than simply discovering it in themselves, because Zimbardo's own instructions, however loosely given, hinted at what kind of behavior would make for a compelling result. The study has never been formally replicated in its original form, partly for ethical reasons, and partly because a study built on such a small, self-selected sample of young men was never going to produce statistically reliable conclusions in the first place. Critics have pointed out that Zimbardo was not a neutral observer. He was actively involved as the prison's superintendent, shaping outcomes rather than simply recording them. None of that erases what happened in that basement. Real people suffered real psychological harm. Real guards did things that disturbed them for years afterward. But it does mean that the tidy lesson so often drawn from this story, that any of us, given a badge and a uniform, would become monsters within days, is more complicated than the popular version suggests. What the experiment may reveal isn't so much a hidden cruelty waiting inside all of us, as it is something quieter and in some ways more unsettling. How powerfully we respond to what we believe is expected of us, how easily we begin performing a role until the performance and the reality become impossible to separate, and how much of what we call our character depends on circumstances we don't usually have to test. That maybe is the more honest lesson of the Stanford prison experiment. Not that ordinary people are secretly evil, but that the line between who we are and who we become is thinner and more dependent on our surroundings than most of us would like to believe. Zimbardo went on to spend much of the rest of his career studying exactly that line, what he eventually called the psychology of evil, and later its counterpart, which he found himself equally drawn to, the psychology of heroism. He came to believe that heroism and cruelty draw from the same well. Both are choices made available by a situation. Both depend, more than we'd like to admit, on whether someone in that moment decides to look away, to go along, or to be the one person, like the graduate student, who walked into that basement on day 5 and simply refused to accept what she was seeing, who says that this has gone far enough. Most of us will never be handed a badge, a set of keys, and a locked door with someone else's freedom on the other side of it. But all of us, in smaller and quieter ways, are handed situations that ask something of us. A workplace where a colleague is being mistreated and going along would be easier than objecting. A group where cruelty towards someone outside it has become the price of belonging. A hierarchy that hands us just a little more power than we're used to holding. The Stanford prison experiment doesn't really ask us to imagine what we'd do if we were a guard in a basement in 1971. It asks something closer to home. It asks what we do the next time we're given even a small amount of power over someone else, and no one is watching to tell us where the line is. because the unsettling truth the experiment leaves behind isn't that some people are guards and some people are prisoners. It's that most of us, under the right pressure, could become either, and the version of ourselves we'd like to believe in is only as reliable as the situations we've actually been tested by. We'd like to think we know who we are. The 6 days in that basement suggest we might only find out when it's already too late to choose.